Hello, everyone. Welcome to Tatami Room episode 11, where I'll be talking about Japanese schools. I think at this point, I've been going to work for long enough that I think I have a better picture of Japanese schools and kind of the way they tick. So I'll be covering that, kind of comparing and contrasting some of the U.S. schools or the U.S. schools that kind of I've had experience, being a student in, and the schools that I'm teaching at in Japan. The Stoic quote for today's episode is, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." And this one is by Marcus Aurelius. Hope y'all like it. A little personal update. So, went on a little hiatus this past week. A little mid-season break. Part of that was just I've been doing 10 episodes and I wanted to just kind of take a break for a week, but I've also been cranking out some law school applications. I've been doing some 11, 12-hour work days, and so I've been going hard. But honestly, even though I'll come home and I'll work, 2 to 3 more hours on just like not work related stuff, but like law school exam applications, for example. Still, I've been having some good fun. I miss judo because I haven't been able to go all that much this week, only once. But so I gotta make some trade offs here and there. In any case, let's cut to the daily life section where I'll be highlighting 3 kind of differences that I see when comparing U.S. schools and Japanese schools. Alright, welcome back, everyone. Let's get started with the first difference that I see between kind of U.S. schools and Japanese schools. Actually, before that, I do want to mention that this is just kind of my experience from schools in the U.S. that are primarily based in, Seattle area in Washington State, and schools that are based in Tanegashima in Japan. So I wouldn't generalize this to schools all across the U.S. or all across Japan, but I do think it's a pretty good barometer, but it's not, I don't think it's generalizable in every instance, so just a word of caution. But first I wanted to talk about kind of lunches and meals and how it's different in Japan when comparing it to the U.S. So when I was a middle schooler or high schooler, I could just kind of pop open, a bag of chips or like a snack, and during class, just as long as I wasn't making a racket, I could kind of go to town and have a little snack for myself. But I don't think, at least from what I've seen so far, you are not really allowed to bring like outside food into the classroom, and there's not really any snacking that is involved during class time. I have not seen any student eat outside a time that is like the designated lunchtime. I also want to note that there is no cafeteria. So in schools in the U.S., you'd have a cafeteria or kind of like a lunchroom where everyone would kind of gather and take their meals. In Japan, or at least the schools that I've taught in, and these are middle schools or a middle school and elementary schools, what happens is you eat your meal at your own desk in your own classroom. And what happens is there's no place for you to buy food. There's not like a little lunch cafeteria kind of location. There's nothing like that. The food comes already prepared from kind of like a central cooking station or kitchen, whatnot. I'm not sure whether that's true for all schools in Japan, but at least the way it works in my schools is like the central kitchen sends out the meal for the day. It's the same for basically all the 11 schools I teach at, and then it gets delivered, and then the students come and they bring it to class. They divide it up into, you got your little tray. You're going to have like 3 types of food and your little carton of milk most of the time. It's going to be rice or bread, soup or some curry, and then either some vegetables or meat on the side. and whoever's on kitchen duty kind of preps the meal and hands it out to everyone. If it's a small class, then basically everyone's helping out and setting it up. And then you start to eat once everyone's in their seats. Also, I do want to mention that before you start eating in Japan, and after you finish, you kind of wait for everyone, and then you say a phrase together. That phrase is "itadakimasu" when you begin to eat, or right before you eat, and "gochitosou deshita" when you finish eating. So I don't think there's really kind of an equivalent in the U.S., but I know in Hungary we hit each other with the "Jó étvágyat kívánok" before we eat. So it's always kind of interesting when I tell my students that in the U.S. there's actually no like "itadakimasu." They're always really surprised by that. I also want to note that there's no picky eaters. At least you can't really be a picky eater. You are expected to finish the food that is put on your plate. So you're not going to have anyone kind of whinging and whining like, no, I don't like this. Like, no, whatever it is for the day, you're going to eat it, or you're going to have to eat most of it. Otherwise, your teacher's going to be kind of disappointed with you. Another kind of difference I wanted to highlight is just kind of class culture and student attitudes. And again, might be the section that's most kind of dependent on the school you're at, I suppose. But in Japan, I haven't really had any I haven't found any quote unquote pick me people in my classes. So when I was a student, middle school, high school, in the U.S., someone would always be raising their hand, just dying to get called on and give the right answer, or sometimes even the wrong answer. But they would just always volunteer. And in Japan, there's like you ask a question, and it's a simple question that people they know the answer, but there's kind of a stigma about being wrong and being wrong in front of other people, and so they would rather keep quiet and not volunteer than kind of risk being wrong, even if it's kind of like a 10% chance of being wrong. You're like, no, I'm only going to volunteer if I'm 100% about the answer. Yeah. Well, getting the wrong answer is not a good look, and I think like as a teacher, I want people to volunteer and kind of even if it's the wrong answer, just kind of say what's on their mind. But I think it's more like a class pressure, or I don't know if it's the other. I don't think the other teachers are also like. I think they're also trying to do what I'm trying to do is solicit answers to the questions, but there's just this kind of social pressure and fear of being wrong. So no one people it's hard to get volunteers in classes. What this kind of leads to is that the students appear very shy because if you're a teacher and you're asking questions and no one's raising their hands, it can be a little disappointing or disheartening, and you're left thinking, oh my gosh, am I doing something wrong, or the student's not engaged. But no, they are. It's just they don't want to be wrong, and so you might think, and I first thought like, oh my gosh, my entire class is really shy, like they don't want to talk to me, or they're too scared to talk to me. But once the class time is over and you got just kind of free time as I'm packing up and heading out, there's a little bit of a break, the kids will come over in droves and they'll be asking you random questions, funny questions. They will ask if you have a partner that you're seeing at the moment. That's their favorite question. But even in the elementary schools, like I've gotten that question quite a bit. But so even if the students appear shy in class, they certainly aren't when it's kind of outside of class time. Also, again, so for in the U.S., class would just kind of start. The bell rings, teacher gets straight to talking. In Japan, that's kind of contrasted with having like a class greeting and a class ending. So when the bell rings, the student leader or someone, basically tells everyone to like sit up straight, and then you might even have a mokuso, which just kind of close your eyes, a little meditation beforehand. Lasts for about 30 seconds, I would say. And then you stop, and then you say, sometimes in English class they chant "Let's start English class," or I think in Japanese they'll just go, they'll list the period, like first period, 1時間目, and then they list like what class it is, like math class or science class, and they'll say like, oh, 始めましょう, which means like let's begin. So 1時間目の理科を始めましょう means like let's begin like first period science class. I also wanted to note that I found really interesting, at least with the kids that I've worked with so far, is that they're really active helpers. Like in the US, if there's kind of group work or if there's a game, right, then it's kind of a free for all and everyone's trying their best to win the game, or everyone's just kind of, doing their own thing. But what I've seen in Japan is like multiple instances where there'll be a game, like an English game that we're playing, and you can win, and someone kind of obviously knows the letters to the ABC better than the other person. But instead of like, okay, collecting all the letters, when they could do that in, quite easily, they'll wait and kind of help out the other person that they're supposed to be competing against. That's kind of, in the US, I mean, maybe even, I think I would have kind of snatched up all the pieces, just to kind of flex on the other person. That's kind of an indictment of my character. But yeah, in Japan, it's quite the opposite. Like, I'll frequently see students helping each other out, which I think is really cool. I also wanted to talk about kind of classroom components, and just things that are in the classroom, certain kind of tools, comparing it to the US. So the class layout is always going to be kind of rows and columns of individual desks or chairs. So in the US, sometimes it's kind of up to the teacher. They might have like 6 people, those desks kind of smushed together, or like islands of 4, or maybe even the rows and columns, but it kind of is up to the teacher. In Japan, it's always the rows and columns. Like, it's that doesn't change. You're going to be sitting in your neat rows and columns. If there's group work, you kind of turn your desk and push it together with the people that you need to do group work with. In terms of classroom equipment, it's mostly chalk. There's lots of chalk, and as I've discovered, it's pretty difficult to write on a chalkboard left-handed. So that's kind of a challenge that I've been trying to work through. It wouldn't really be that much of a problem if my handwriting didn't have to be neat. If I could just kind of use my my kind of not very good and not very neat handwriting, but because I need to spell things out for the students and they need to see that it's not like it's not an F but it's a T, I need to be kind of precise with my letters, and that has been a challenge. At some schools, the kids do have like little tablets. When I was in elementary school in the US, we would also have elementary, middle, and high school, you would have kind of a little laptop that you could get from the school to enhance educational purposes. Oftentimes, I would just kind of use it to play games. I remember playing cool math games on there, Pokemon Flash games. But yeah, so that's kind of, I think in Japan is becoming more common, but still not every school has access to those kind of tablets yet. Not every school that I work at least. This next kind of difference between kind of U.S. schools and Japanese schools is the school uniforms. I think there's definitely like some schools in the U.S., probably some like private schools or boarding schools that require uniforms, but in Japan, everyone is required to wear their little school uniform, except teachers. We don't have a school uniform, which is great, because I have a little bit more liberty with what I get to wear, even though it's still I'm expected to show up to work as a professional. So yeah. For this one is particularly it's uniform related, but it's particular about the elementary school kids. So everyone in elementary school is going to have a in the schools that I work at has a red or white cap that you can kind of flip inside out. Flip it, one way it's red. Flip it the other way, it's white. And I think that kind of plays like two roles. One being during recess, you can quite easily, decide teams with like, okay, this is red team or white team, and then also, deciding teams for there's a school race or school sports event, and the entire school is kind of divided into either red team or white team, and then the hats also help in that case. I think I've also seen first and second graders, or it might just be first graders, but they don't get the cooler kind of invertible hat, the red and white one. They wear this smaller yellow one. I think that's just so drivers on the road can more easily identify, oh, that's a first grader, really small child, versus not a first grader. Not entirely sure what the rhyme or reason is behind it, but that's just something I've noticed. Another thing that I want to mention is inside shoes and outside shoes. So in the U.S., you just kind of trample on into the school. Whatever shoes you wear outside doesn't really matter. In Japan, you must have like slippers or specific kind of indoor shoes. You're not allowed to wear your outdoor shoes within the school, so that's not really allowed. I think it makes sense you'd bring a bunch of dirt into the school, but that's kind of a big difference that I've noticed. Is luckily I was aware of it on my first days, so I didn't show up and be like, hey, wait, so what do I wait? This is weird. But I was already aware of it, and most schools do have like little slippers for guests that are available to use. So usually I'll just use one of those ones because I'm going around to 11 different schools and don't feel like carrying around my slippers every day. So, I get to school, put on one of the guest slippers. They're comfortable enough that I don't entirely mind them. And yeah, I just walk around within the school, always walk around in the slippers. No outside shoes indoors. Contrast that with America, where all the schools that I went to in America, you could just kind of walk straight in, whatever shoes you wore outside. So, all right. So that's kind of what I had for comparing and contrasting Japanese and American schools. I think I might do another segment on this in the future. There's some things I didn't get to, like soji jikan, which is cleaning time. But for now, I hope this will do. And with that being said, let's cut to the current events section. Alright, welcome back everyone. Let's get started with the current events section, which I just realized that I forgot to mention that there was going to be one, or what it's about, at the beginning of the episode. But wait no further, I have a really interesting section coming up for you all, and it's about cheating and cheating culture in Japan. So let's get started. So the inspiration for this section came after I watched this video on YouTube by this guy named Takashi from Japan. He goes around and interviews people on the street, asking them about Japanese culture and whatnot. His videos are really cool. Go ahead and check him out. I think you can get kind of a unique perspective on Japanese life and way of thinking if you watch his videos. So I was casually browsing YouTube, stumbled upon this video where he was asking people what they thought about cheating, what was considered cheating in Japan, and what wasn't. And I found the video really interesting, and I don't think it was just me, because I think these videos sparked quite a big online debate, multiple Reddit threads and whatnot. So I decided to kind of try my best to break down the issue for you all as well. So I want to start by saying that leave your Western perspective at the door for this one. Cheating in Japan is viewed quite differently than it is viewed, let's say, in America. So I just want to start by, preface with that. And I think part of that is due to the fact that the view of like dating with the intent to marry and marriage in Japan in general has this very functional view, a very functional perspective. It's kind of like, oh, hey, let's get married, do our duty to society, and have some kids. And So it's more of like, okay, we're gonna have kids, and this is just kind of what people do, is get married, rather than having like companionship and an intimate emotional connection. And I'm not saying that that isn't like having an emotional connection is not present in marriages in Japan. I'm just saying that I think, and at least based off of the research that I found, there's definitely instances of marriages where it's just really this very very functional view that's in play. And another thing that I found is there's this way of thinking. I'm not sure how prevalent it is, but people seem to think that it's unreasonable to expect one partner to be able to fulfill all your needs. And instead, let's say if your partner isn't meeting one of your needs in its entirety, then it shouldn't be unreasonable for you to go seek out someone else to fulfill that need. So, yeah, I thought that that was really interesting. And I think part of this whole thing is also fueled by the fact that apparently, marriage and having kids in Japan is viewed as this, way of becoming a true adult in Japanese society. So I think that kind of motivates people to, oh, well, I need to become an adult. This is just something I need to check off the to-do list or something. And when you're approaching marriage and dating from that kind of perspective, then it's less about having an intimate connection with the other person, and more just like, let's get the job done. And again, I'm not entirely sure on like what percent of marriages have this, or how prevalent this is. I just think that based off of kind of what I've researched and also what I've heard living here in Nishinomote in Japan, I think that this is certainly true for at least some marriages. I also wanted to talk a little bit about Japanese people's views on brothels and kind of cheating in brothels. So, prostitution is illegal in Japan, but it still occurs basically. And I think to understand why, it's important to know that polyamory has been a concept in Japan much longer than it has been in the West. So in America, you've had quite a big Christian influence, where you have like, okay, you have one wife and that should be your wife forever. And recently, I think people have been starting to think like, oh, polyamory, there's not too much wrong with it. But I think based off what I've found is that in Japan, this concept of polyamory has been around for a lot longer. And so this kind of leads to another interesting fact that I found, which is that Japan is apparently the 7th country where cheating is, quote, morally acceptable. So cheating isn't like well, at least not in all instances, a moral indictment of the individual who cheats. Like, if there are some instances in Japan where if you do end up cheating on your significant other, partner, spouse, or whatever, you are not like, oh, the scum, or you're not a morally bad person. Obviously, there's some caveats to this. It's not just a blank slate, and for some, it depends on like why you cheated and with who. So going back to the video that I watched from Takashi, people generally seem to think that if you go to a brothel and something happens over there, it's more okay because you are paying and there's not an emotional connection involved. And so, as someone from America, I'd say, well, that's still cheating. But I think here in Japan, it's more like, well, there's money involved, so there's no feelings attached, so it's more acceptable. And I haven't just seen that from Takashi's video. I've also kind of anecdotally heard some stories of this with people that I've talked to here in Ishinomote. When I said good reason, a couple people that were interviewed by like Takashi also said that, like, if, for example, you go out with your boss to celebrate like a business meeting or big bonus signing, that is also acceptable. I think in Japan, if it's typical or it's more usual for once like a big business deal is closed to go out with your boss and some people who made the deal happen, and instead you go out drinking and you end up at a brothel. And I think there's that kind of pressure where, well, if your boss is doing it, you don't want to be the one guy that's like, oh, I'm too good for this kind of thing, and so you go ahead and do it anyway. As someone from the U.S., I would say, well, you gotta stick up for yourself, stand up for yourself in that situation. But I can see how people here might view that as, oh well, it was kind of he was kind of coerced, or he was going with his boss, so he kind of had to do it. I also heard that being transparent and doing doing it quote elegantly meant that it was acceptable. So as long as you did it respectfully, which I'm not entirely sure how one does cheat respectfully, and one is more open and honest about it, which I think I can't fathom telling my significant other, like, hey, I'm just gonna hop down to where real quick and be back. But I think at least the people that Takashi interviewed, they generally seem to think that if you were more transparent, then cheating was more acceptable. So anyway, so that's kind of a little crash course on cheating in Japan, and the culture surrounding it. I hope I did a decent job of it. Kind of a very interesting issue. I hope you all learned something about it, and let's cut to the closing section. Alright, let's wrap up today's episode with the word and the stats of the week. So the word this week is uwaki, which is the Japanese word for cheating. I thought it was very in line with the current events section for today's episode. And it's interesting because the kanji that make up this word uwaki is the kanji for to float and rise to the surface. That's one kanji, and the second kanji is feeling, like a feeling that you have. So it's like I guess the whole meaning would be like a floating feeling, which is interesting because that's generally kind of a positive feeling, I think, rather than a negative one. And I thought that's interesting because I think it kind of speaks to the fact that in Japan, cheating isn't as morally negatively charged as it is in some other places. And the stats of the week are 84 and 61%. And these are the percent of women and men, respectively, that find that extramarital affairs help out their marriage. So that's really interesting, is that quite a few women and a lot of men as well find that actually going out and having some affairs and cheating or doing uwaki is actually helpful in their marriage, as opposed to something that kind of breaks the marriage down, which I think in the U.S. it would be quite the opposite. But this again speaks to the fact that cheating here is viewed with a very different lens. But yeah, that's your word of the week, uwaki, and your stats, 84 and 61%. I hope you all found those interesting, as I certainly did. I do want to finish off the episode by saying that I'm back. I will be back creating episodes weekly. I think I'll try to do another 10 episode stretch, and then I think that'll be the end of season 1. I think I'm trying to do about like 20 episodes per season. And I think that's decent because it should line up with around New Year's, I believe. So kind of a fitting end to the season, I think. And I want to thank everyone who tuned in. I hope you all enjoyed today's episode. I will be back next week. Per aspera ad astra, everyone. Peace and love.